Welcome, everybody. I'm here with a friend and colleague and mentor, Peggy DiVincenzo. She's a mindfulness instructor, years of experience both in mindfulness practice as well as mental health, providing mental health. And so I feel very honored, Peggy, to have you here. To get us started, I'd love to hear how you came to start practicing mindfulness.
Well, thank you so much for that, Wilson. I began practicing mindfulness many years ago, over 40 years ago. I started a program as a law student, and I was highly anxious. And so at that time, the book, The Relaxation Response by Herbert Benson was floating around. And I went to my local college counseling center, and the practice of mindfulness meditation was being taught there. So that's how I began. And even though I had a very brief history in law school and the practice of law, because what I found out was that it wasn't the right thing for me, the meditation practice and learning stayed.
Well, what kept you committed to practice over the years? Because you've been very steady with it.
Yeah.
What keeps you practicing every day?
Well, it's the many very obvious but also subtle things that I have learned and developed over many years of practice. And I have to say too, I wouldn't have continued it if I had known, that it would take 40 years for any change to happen. I wouldn't have continued, meaning that it doesn't take 40 years. But that's how long I've been practicing. But the things that keep me are having a sense of balance in terms of my inner sense of presence and peace and well-being, and also having these ways and these methods of being with what's happening outside of me as well. So navigating difficult experiences and learning to be aware of my body, learning to be aware of my thoughts, and taking a critical look at them.
Have you felt any sort of transformation occur that you attribute to the regular practice of mindfulness? You mentioned some, but how would you say in terms of your core of who you are as a person and how you feel and how you navigate life and your awareness? Have you felt some transformations?
Well, that's really the payoff, Wilson, of this kind of regular practice, is that I know that I'm the same person, but I'm a much more balanced and centered and calm person. I'm much more attuned to other people. And I'm attuned to other people because I've become attuned to myself initially. So things like kindness, confidence, a willingness to be vulnerable, willingness to make mistakes, and understanding that all these states are really temporary, and there are ways of being with them with kindness that help me navigate life in a way that I never thought I could in my 20s when I was beginning this practice.
Well, you mentioned an interesting thing, which is when you first got introduced to it, if you had known how long it would take and how regular you would have to be before you started feeling the traction from your practice, how do you go about explaining that and helping someone who's brand new to introduce them to it? How do you walk them through?
Yeah, and I probably misstated that. What I really meant to say, if I had thought it would take me 40 years, I never would have kept with it. But it doesn't take 40 years. So what I gained initially, and what I try to help my students understand, is that there are some immediate benefits, and oftentimes we'll feel them right after we finish meditating, especially in the early phase of learning to do it. So you might feel calmer, you might feel happier, you might feel just more relaxed physically. And yet those states don't necessarily last. However, the more that you practice, the more they become natural states, the more your mind and all of your neural circuitry is inclined in those areas. And you know about that because there's a lot of neural counterpart to what it is that we're practicing. And actually, there are very, very positive changes in our brains, just in terms of the ability to be with different things, to pay attention better, those kinds of very useful ways that we can change. So there's really no practice that's too little or too spread out. The more we do, the better things can be, the more we can learn.
Well, you mentioned several really crucial points. The gradual transformation of how we're using our neurology, because there's a lot of research now that our brains are geared for survival and we have a negativity bias. And you'll notice in the news, they always try to give you the most outrageous news because they know it'll capture your attention. That's what we pay attention to. And of course, the more we pay attention to that, the more we're driving our stress response and the more we're fueling our fight flight response and the more burnt out and depressed we become.
Yeah.
And so, really, by switching what we're paying attention to consciously, we're choosing to go into our ventral vagal responses and get ourselves in a state where we can start to live in a calm space instead of a frantic space. And so, again, you mentioned it first, there is some pleasantness as you start to practice regularly. You go from kind of what one meditator calls a hot boredom into a cool boredom, and you start to want to come back to it, right? But as you go forward, what are some of the hurdles like that almost stopped you, and how do you get over those hurdles, and how do you keep going forward until it becomes more natural?
Well, and that's a great question. Some of the hurdles can be, I guess the most common one is thinking that you're not doing it right. And I think with the initial training that I received, it was everything wasn't as spelled out as things are now. It's easier to understand all of this now than it was when I started in my tradition. But actually, the key piece is to understand that our minds are naturally like that. We call it monkey mind. So if you visualize a monkey swinging from branch to branch at the zoo or out in the jungle, that's sort of the idea. That's what our minds like to do. And so people immediately think that they're doing it wrong or they've failed, even worse, at practicing mindfulness meditation when that's not the case at all. So that's one of the big hurdles that can occur. And I certainly went through that. The other thing that can happen is a sense of boredom. And I think that boredom comes from not being far enough ahead yet with the value of paying attention to nuances of shift in body sensation, mind states, thinking, whatever it might be. But we're always practicing between concentrating on one thing and then toggling over to being with whatever comes up, but not holding on to it. So it does require practice, and yet the benefits are so many.
Living, we can't get away from living in ourselves, with who we are. And if our internal world is calm, awake, and delightful, what a nice home to build. So would you lead us through a little bit of meditation?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So you could just sit in a comfortable position, and if you like, you can close your eyes or you can simply lower your gaze. And sort of let your body be upright and comfortable and still for a moment here. And to begin, let's just focus on the breath in the most ordinary way. Just noticing the inhalation and the exhalation, but really paying attention to it. Is it cool or warm? Does the breathing feel shallow or deep, fast or slow, damp or dry? And simply noticing helps our mind practice paying attention. And next, just check in with your body. Notice where your attention goes. Maybe it goes to some slightly uncomfortable place, or maybe there's a pain. But if you check in with some other place, like your left earlobe, you might notice there's a sense of a neutral feeling. And again, it's just a matter of being with whatever is there without trying to change it. Simply noticing your feet and how they feel as they make contact with the floor. Noticing your hands on your lap or on the arms of the chair. And then finally, pay attention to whatever thoughts are going through your mind. And the idea is to pay attention to each thought. Notice the beginning and the end if you can. And notice whether there is judgment. Are you judging what you're thinking? Are you trying to control it? And see if you can let go of that judgment. It's a simple noting, oh, remembering, or oh, planning. Or judging. Just being the observer and paying attention and letting each thought go as it passes through. And noticing another one will pop up. And then finally, just notice how you're feeling right now, your emotion. Pay attention to whatever that is. And see if you can develop just now a little bit of gratitude for these last few minutes that you've been practicing. Regardless of how you think it went, just feel a bit of gratitude toward yourself. Maybe even a little kindness. And maybe some kindness for whoever else may be watching right now. For the effort.
It's beautiful. Very calming. I found at the end, when you move to that self-gratitude and then kindness towards the self, and then moving out to extend it, it really opens the heart. First the mind settles, then opens up, which is a beautiful place to be.
Yes.
Well, I am so grateful as I mentioned before we started the recording, a lot of the strategies in the Compassion's Compass book, I actually stole from Peggy because of knowing you over the years. You had a very good influence on me in my practice. Do you have any final words of advice to people who are watching?
I really do. And that is, don't give up. It's really worth the effort. And actually, the data is now showing that even 5 minutes a day makes a difference. So most of us can find 5 minutes for something. So if you think you might want to practice a little bit of mindfulness meditation, start with 5 minutes and thank yourself each time you finish.
Thank you so much. I feel in your debt always. And that reminded me of the old Zen joke. If you can't practice 20 minutes, practice 40. I like the idea of short and sweet, and then each time feeling some joy towards yourself for having put in the effort. So thank you so much.
You're
I'll,
welcome, Listen.
I'll stop it here.